So what we'll be doing today is sharing our experience of doing security on the cloud, but also the paradigms and the strategy we adopted. Right? So before we start, I think Priyanka, if you could give a quick intro.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Priyanka. I describe myself as a security nerd, and I actually lead the platform security architecture at Maersk. I am very excited about framework design patterns, software architectural styles, secure engineering, and of course, right now, developing secure applications in the cloud. I have about 15 years of experience spanning different roles. From a software engineer to a tech lead, and right now as a security architect. And yeah, I have a master's in software engineering from CMU and also a bachelor's in computer science. And I'll hand it over to Joji.
Thank you, Priyanka. So my name is Joji George. I head architecture, security, DevOps, and reliability engineer today at Maersk, and the platform we operate, the organization is called SCM Platform. SCM stands for Supply Chain Management, which is one of our core businesses within Maersk. As you would recognize, I am very passionate about architecture as such and every spectrum of architecture. So, and having started my career as a software engineer and having done many different roles over these 2 decades, and have been also fortunate to work with some of the great MNCs in the world, not only in India but also in Europe. Come background obviously with the software, but then also as we progress in the area, looked at management also. So I try to balance that, and that's what I've been doing also in my recent role. So with that, I will quickly start on what we are. So guys who are, you could go on, please. Yes. Thank you.
Let me mute everyone so that you can again unmute yourself. Yeah, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Great. So what we'll do is in this session, we have through 3 areas we will be covering. So we will divide our talk and presentation into 3 phases. In the first section, I will talk about the context to what where we started with, and what was the motivation to do this. In the second section, Priyanka will deep dive into how did we go about implementing it and what did we do to make it secure for our platform. And finally, I'll come back with what were the challenges. As we all know, it's not easy, and what was the learning in this whole journey. Okay, so today, if you look at the world we are living in, which is all digital, I think cybersecurity is of paramount importance, but also it is one of the new normal in our life, right? One of the main factors, if you look at it, is the increased digital transformations across industries, and which in turn has also accelerated the adoption of cloud like Azure, right? And we are one of those who have chosen Azure as our preferred cloud partner a couple of years back when Maersk started on this digital transformation journey. So it becomes very important for us that security is integrated and is central to what we do, from software engineering to the solutioning we do. And the big question for us was how do we go about doing it, right? And we also at Maersk looked at the greatest and the latest in this area, and we said, let's take the good practices we have and the principles we have in secure DevSecOps, which is being embraced in many of the organizations across the world. So with that, when Priyanka and I started in this current team around a year back, what we said is that let's set up a security architecture vision in place. And one of the first things we did was start with the analysis of what is the current state. So we did some surveys, interviews with the teams we had, and indeed it was a big eye opener at that point of time. Firstly, because while it was clear for everybody that security is important, but nobody owned it, right? The second biggest thing we also realized that security was an afterthought, right? So just before you go to release, or if you have a compliance issue or a risk identified, that's when some security tests were done, and typically a penetration test would be the one we would do. So it became very clear at that point that is just not about defining just some security principles as an architecture guideline, but we have to not only shift the security left, but make it central to how we deliver the solution. And with that, we looked at what is important for us in the organization. And these are the three key areas we chose, right? The first is how do we make security a important factor for everybody in the team. So let the team own it, but also champion it. And then in that whole process, what we get out of it is that the security becomes everybody's concern, not something a security team or a security architect has to deal with. The second thing is that we said again, because we were so shifted to the right, how do we not just shift to the left, but also make it continuous, right? So, and again, taking the agile principles into practice, we said it's not just secured by design, but security has to be there in every stage of the life cycle of the software. And finally, there has to be a continuous feedback loop, like in any agile practices, so that we can help the team identify where the issues are, but also address them at the right stages in the software cycle. So with these guiding principles and thoughts, we defined what we call the continuous security architecture. Now, this architecture is by no means saying it's complete, but what we have tried to do is take all the good practices that we have in DevSecOps paradigm, combine it with our delivery life cycle, and then address that. The idea was this would be our intended target state, not that we would be there in months or weeks or years. So that the idea was that this is where we want to achieve. And for that, it was essential that it becomes part of the whole delivery cycle, software development and operations. So again, the DevSecOps, we know it supports both the angles of it. And then it also helps our teams to continuously develop, but monitor and respond to the vulnerabilities that we'll have. So let me spend a little bit of time into this, because we will have a deep dive into each of these phases when Priyanka will talk about it. But let me give some context to that. So starting from the left top corner, predict to planning, right? So prediction is how can we predict what could be the potential risk we will have in the solution. And that's where we started introducing threat modeling design sessions, and also taking intelligence information from cybersecurity experts, be it technical, operational, strategic, right? And whatever we could get out of that was the idea, and bake it into the planning process itself. The second one was, then comes the next phase of it. How do you prevent it? So, and that is typically when the software development cycle happens. So in there, we said, let's build in those control mechanisms, not only in the code, but also in the platform infrastructure, every layer of it, right? And we'll also deep dive a little bit into that. How did we manage to do that? And then comes the whole detection of it. So let's assume everything went well. We did all the right things by being secure in coding, in the infrastructure, but how do we make sure that it's really secure? And that's where the whole testing process started. And like I said in the beginning, our focus previously in this organization was doing a penetration test and getting a green signal so that we can go to production. That's it. So we wanted to move again early enough, and we introduced the static and dynamic testing also as part of the whole pipeline. And finally, as we know, security is not like 100% in any case. So how do we respond if something goes wrong? And that's where the whole security operations part of it, with having monitoring tools in that, and a process to respond and recover from any failures that will happen because of an attack. So additionally, what we also did, which is not depicted here, is as part of the platform's reference architecture, security is an important key pillar, or I would say the most important pillar, which we also defined and made it like a guardrail as part of the whole process. Thereby, what we were trying to ensure is that security is baked into the apps we create, the services we build, and the infrastructure on which we operate. With that, I will now hand it over to Priyanka to talk in detail.
Thanks, Joji. Diving deep into this, so the first thing was the tenant on predict, and for this, uh, the focus areas was, as Joji said, threat modeling and secure solution design, and of course that feeds into our security planning. So Joji, if you could just move the slide next, because I don't know if I can. Oh, I am. I'm able to. Okay, great. So the first thing about the threat modeling, right? So the main things that we were trying to do here, also to give a little bit of background, Maersk had this huge cyber attack in 2017 called the NotPetya, and so one of the things that came out of that was people were not really aware of all our assets and how to protect that, right? And so that's why we did a lot of focus on looking at any new sort of solution in architectures coming up. We try to identify the assets and try to protect them. Once you identify your assets, then you're able to look at different threats that come out to compromise those assets, and then your vulnerabilities. So this, once you're able to identify these threats and vulnerabilities, then you actually bring together a whole team of people, both technology as well as business, to decide on which are the most important threats, and then you prioritize them and have a control mechanism to mitigate these threats. So on this slide, you actually see an actual example of what we've done. Like we have all the different players in Azure, because we're on the cloud, and how we have our different trust boundaries and how the different players communicate with each other. So we exactly know what our assets are, what is in context and what's out of context. So based on this, the threat modeling, I think maybe Joji, yeah. We then come into our important part, which is our secure solution design. Here we actually elaborate on the threat model with our team of solution architects, and we identify key security principles that we adhere to. So for example, the ones that we're shown here, like apply least privileges, defense in depth, visibility and control of all the transactions that happening, and also understanding the risks, which is most important, because you only want to be working on things which are important to business, and focus your energies on that. And finally, since we've already been through the journey where we've had a cyber attack, how resilient are we to a potential cyber attack by following these principles, and also how quickly we recover from it. So these are things that we heavily focus on the solution design, and actually further down in the slides, we'll also talk about on the platform infrastructure. Now, both these activities, that is both the design and the threat modeling activities, they actually contribute to producing work items for us, which we actually track in our AzureDevops backlogs. And one interesting thing that's come out, like from last year to now, is that when we actually started this journey, teams were typically working only on, say, bugs that were coming out, security bugs, and fewer tasks. But as we've started on this journey in the planning, we've also seen that there are a variety of different items that teams have been working on, whether it is even there are user stories or features related to security, because everybody now understands and there's a visibility because of all these design activities that we're doing upfront. So it's easy to also plan for this. So this is what this diagram depicts. Yeah, next slide. So now coming on to, after we've done the predictive, of course, we're coming on to the prevent part of our, and this is where actually the major chunk of our work happens. So if you could move to the next slide. Yeah, so this this particular picture actually depicts how we do our continuous delivery pipeline. So we have, as in many organizations, different environments, your development test, pre-prod and your prod. But what's different is apart from the fact that in the development environments where you typically, you check in your code and you would run your unit tests, we also introduce your security tests. So your SAST, your third-party vulnerabilities, etc. in the development phase. And in the test phase, we also do, our DAST, which is the dynamic application security testing. And then currently, after these two things are all green and everything is good to go, then we actually promote to a higher environment, which is like our pre-prod. And there, what we do is, apart from our automated tests that we have, we also have a manual intervention. So we have our pen tests which happen there, and then if everything is kind of green and it's good to go, then we get promoted to the prod. So that way we've been kind of able to achieve also the scales in which we operate at. I think, yeah, we can move to the next slide. So now, so all this is great in practice. I mean, in theory, right? But how do you put that into practice? So one of the things is like, how do teams, how can they actually focus on security, because they really want to be building features. In that case, actually, what we've done is we've also included security in the definition of done. So as soon as you have a new feature, also your security has to tests also have to pass. And for that, we have our criteria defined, and we have a kind of a vulnerability baseline, which has been defined across the organization, that we actually refer to, which says how many highs, mediums, and lows are acceptable in an application. So that's actually upfront, so people can look that up, and that helps in that's like our reference point for knowing what needs to be done. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So now this is, of course, the actual place where we actually do the secure code, right? So we have actually three different images over here. So the ones in the bottom is our static application security testing that that actually goes into your code, inspects it to find if there is vulnerable code being written. So so we have we've used a combination of like open source as well as licensed tools. So we've used SonarQube to like show us like our security hotspots, and then we also use right now we also use tools like Polaris, which again looks at our code and finds out. So on the left, for example, the bottom left, you have a CSRF flaw being pointed out, a live example from our code. And on the right, we also have something on the weak cryptographic algorithm, like a random number generator not being initialized properly and what could happen there. And finally, now we are pretty much a web based shop and a microservices architecture. So we have a lot of third-party dependencies. And how do you actually work with the libs and third-party libraries and make sure that they're safe? So we actually have a tool. Again, we have open source and licensed tools to actually check that all the third-party dependencies that you have, right from your NuGet packages or your NPM libraries, all of them are safe to use. So we actually have another step in our pipelines to make sure that whatever you're bringing in is actually fit and doesn't have vulnerabilities. And so that is an example of what is shown here. Yeah, so again, so now that we have all these things, that good things which we do, to actually get it working, you need to have a pipeline. So we firmly believe in pipeline driven automation. So to just give you an idea, like, so when we started the on our platform work a year back, we had about 70 pipelines, so we actually started creating templates, what we call the secure templates, which tells you like how once you have your repository, what are the tests you need to do. And it has all your SAST, your third-party library checking, and then your DAST, and all of that. We have a kind of a template that you can just pick off and then use. And so we started with 70 pipelines, and now if you look at it, we're growing. So we have like more than 100, and it can only grow because as the platform increases, as with other organizations, you always introduce a new service to do a particular feature, and how do you make sure that that is secure? So again, then you just come in and plug that into the template, and then you're good to go, and it shows you stuff and that you can act upon. So that's the way we achieve it. One of the important parts in this, and I think that's also talked about in other sessions, was the policies, right? The Azure policies. So we are also like pretty much using Azure policies to guide us. So we have policies on our resources, app services, Azure functions, you name it. We have strict policies on what is allowed and what is not. And we do track non-compliance through what we call as security beacons, which can give us a kind of a high level observability, which I'll talk about later. And when the other thing is that also when we've been doing penetration tests, or also when we see anomalous behavior which is spotted by, say, in the Azure Security Center, then we actually tune our policies to catch that. So, for example, one of our penetration tests in the beginning of the platform, when we weren't really fully in the DevSecOps world, we found out that there were people actually creating apps without HTTPS, and so then of course we set up a policy for the same, and of course that's something that we track, and so on and so forth. Every time we see like an anomalous behavior, then we tweak our policies to prevent this attack from occurring again. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is an important part of our infrastructure hardening that we do. So like we said, we have all these different principles, right? Like least privileges and defense in depth. And similarly, so that's how when we started off, we didn't have these very many layers. So if anybody comes in, it's once they penetrate one layer, they're in, and they can do what they want. So which is why we carefully decided that we need to have stop the attacker at every layer, and that's how our planning has gone. So right from say on the the top right corner where you have the identity management, that is if you're coming in as a user, you get your identity has to be authorized by an identity management provider, and we have a MRSC solution for that. And once that comes in and it enters into the our apps within Azure, we have a front door. So of course, with the front door, as you're all aware, we have the WAF policies, the firewall restrictions, the DDoS prevention, and then we come into our apps, and then our front-facing apps, and then when the front-facing apps actually talk to the back-end services or the shared services, each one is in its own sort of trust boundary, and that means what we mean is like our virtual net. And we in fact have an internal secure gateway that talks with our access management solutions to make sure that even if you're doing a service-to-service call, that again, you're checking it for the access management to make sure that the service A can access the services of service B, for example. So as we've seen in previous attacks, once an attacker gets in, then he's able to pivot on one particular service and then laterally propagate and then cause havoc. So that was our thinking in trying to have a sort of zero trust approach to all our services. And our mantra is verify, 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 because we're really not trusting anyone. So that kind of in a high level overview gives you an idea of the kind of infrastructure hardening that we do. And now coming to the part of the detect. Right. So here we have our SAST and DAST and penetration tests, which I'll just explain. So I've already shown you about the SAST scans that we've done, but the DAST is the dynamic application security testing, where you're testing the application live. So for that, we use the open source tool ZAP. And the results are scanned in the pipeline, and that again appears on the pipeline. And apart from the DAST, again in this very microservices world, we have a lot of Docker images that we use as well, and we use the container scanning capability that is there in the Azure Container Registry with our standard subscription, which also tells us which images are good, what is vulnerable. And based on that, like for example, I think in the security center, what you see here, you have these recommendations on what you're supposed to do with the high vulnerabilities. We look at that and we kind of upgrade our images based on that. So that way we have not only clean code, clean libraries, but clean images as well. I can move on to the thing. So the penetration test, now what we found interesting based on this journey is that in 2020, when we were doing the penetration test, I don't think we were that mature in our DevSecOps approach, and we've clearly seen a reduction in the number of defects that the penetration testers are able to find, and we believe this is because of our investment in the security and moving it upfront, the secure testing that we're doing upfront. So as you can see, like even like between 2020 and 2021, we also, the number of apps and services that we have increased, but the defects are actually been harder to find, because I think the easier defects are being caught by our security tests as well. And finally, so this is the last part, which is to do with respond. So in the DevSecOps, the ops plays a big part. So how do we monitor and respond and recover from an event? So yeah. So again, as we've said, the defense in depth is a mantra, and yeah, that's something that we have security in every layer, but observability is a big thing, right? So especially in a huge platform. So one of the things that we found with the security centers, this inventory management that they have, which is great, because at one level, you can look at all your resources, how many are unhealthy, how many is unmonitored, and then if there are any subscriptions that are being missed out. So you have a big picture view of that, and then you're able to actually go in and apply controls on every layer. So the one big thing of actually responding to an event is you should at least know if it's there in your inventory, and that we heavily rely on the security center for doing that. And the next one is, of course, now that we have all our alerts coming in from the security center, we feed it into our security ops. We have a big operation here at Maersk, and it's 24/7, so somebody's manning it. So the Azure Sentinel is used for making the connection, and all the high alerts, once they are received by the SecOps teams, they actually go and analyze it, and when it is found to be critical, we are alerted. So we've had examples in the recent past where we've had somebody like randomly do an Nmap scan on our public IPs, and then we found one particular developer had created a, for example, an app service that was public, and then it had to be shut down. But the turnaround was very great, because as soon as he had created, he was like, we had already knew about it. He was like, hey, what's happening? Because we knew it, because our SecOps already alerted us, and then alerts from the security center also sends us alerts. So yeah, that's one thing. And so this is this slide which I'm showing is which I talked about before, about having this high level observability. So we have something called as a security beacons here. So like, for example, secure data, secure code. So if somebody wants to come and look at like what is the health of the platform, like how is my data, how is my code for this huge platform with so many services, how is it doing? We can come here, and there's a simple traffic light kind of signaling. Green means it's all good, and red means it's obviously something's wrong. And then if you drill into those problem areas, that actually moves on to the alerts that you get from the Azure Security Center. And the thing about the alerts is it's pretty detailed. So you write from what is the attack, what is the intent of the attack, and then also it gives you more information on how the attack was used. So we've also had like an SQL injection attack in the past, and we were able to shut it down and also have raise a ticket with Azure when we found it was not somebody that we recognize. And the action plan was also very easy to take. So that way we find that we have a grip on our estate, and if anything happens, we're able to respond to it. And so this slide actually depicts that. And I think that's about it. I'll hand it over to Joji.
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. So when we look back, obviously it looks like it's great. We have grip on, like Priyanka said, the state we are in. We have good observability at this point, but none of this started from where we were, right? So around a year back, it was around, I would say it was almost like nil to where we are today, and we still have a long way to go. But on the way also, we also recognize that it's not easy to just shift the focus from where we are to where we want to be, with the intention of having continuous security without getting the teams involved early on, right? And also bringing in some of the challenges like culture, the skills, or the tooling we have. And that is also embedded in large organizations where Maersk, like, which has been more than 100 years in the business, has traditionally been doing something very differently. So in this session, what I'm going to do is basically cover these three areas, basically about the culture part, the skill part, and the tool part, and what did we do to address that on the way, and then where we are today. To start with culture, one of the major thing was basically security. Like I said in the beginning, was nobody's concern, right? Basically, nobody looked at it as an important factor. Why? Everybody acknowledged the importance of it. So the first thing was, how do we start that conversation, right? Have that discussion early on at the design phase itself. The second thing which we also realized is, once we found an issue, how do you make sure that we can address it right quickly and make it part of the daily scrum, part of the backlog that you run? And because we didn't start on a good foot, we also have a lot of depths, because our code base was large enough already. The applications are already running. So how do we make sure the depth is also addressed? And finally, it was always a interesting conversation saying, who is going to fix this, right? And if you look at some of the traditional companies where I have worked, or many of you have worked, it's typically typically a security team, security engineers in the organization who does it, right? And we also had that big debate saying, do we bring in experts here to fix it and say, there's a special team doing this, or do we want this to be everybody's concern, right? And so we chose the latter, and we wanted each of the team members to also own that and address it. So what we did to address some of these challenges, one is we brought in an architects and developer forum. So we built a forum where we could discuss these things early on, and because having architects and security being part of the same organizational structure, it was much easier for us, because then it became one of the tenets of that whole forum. And we also have what we call now a DevSecOps guild. The second thing we obviously said, we need to measure it. So how do we know we are secure, right? It's all good, we are running tests, but how do we know it's being addressed? So the second thing we wanted is to introduce metrics, and which is open and it's trackable, and that's again where AzureDevops comes in. And finally, the DevSecOps Guild helped us also be a forum to share the learnings and the real stories from team to team, right? And when we are talking about teams, we're talking about teams in size, Scrum teams of size from 15 to 20 Scrum teams, right? So it's a large organization where things have to move things. We need a lot of federation in the organization. The second clear issue we had to address was skills. Now, how many coming from a software background, we all know, right? Security is not something we start with immediately, right? And we have to upskill ourselves. We have to understand where are the areas of vulnerabilities. We also have to look at what are the patterns being used. So that was one of the couple of things we had to look at. And these three key areas, like one is understanding this technology stack within this large team, ranging from .NET to Java to JavaScript libraries and others. How do we make it sure that it is aligned? The biggest problem we had that even just within the .NET framework, we had multiple versions of it, right? And some of them were in the very older ones, some of them in the newer ones, and nobody understood what does it mean. Second thing was about how do we take care of basic authentication and authorization. Again, because clouds provide multiple solutions, people started doing different creative ideas, and that led to different ways of doing authentication and authorization. which also complicates the whole architecture, but also operations of it. Because if something goes wrong, you don't know where exactly it failed. If an app fails, is it because of the app's its own access control, or is it because of a central access control, etc., etc. And finally, it was also about our immaturity in the organization to how do we address these bugs, right? What does it mean to do it? So we did these three key areas. First was we standardized the versions we work on, right? Which sounds simple, but was to be very honest, very difficult because of the large spectrum of things. So how do we make sure that versions are upgraded and updated and to the one we want? We also made sure that all the libraries and versions we use are of safe versions and none that have any vulnerabilities, right? So that is also a lot of upfront investment to make sure we test it out and make sure that these popular, open sources and third parties are, safe. And like Priyanka alluded, so we started looking at the tools which can help us. We also, as part of the security architecture, started documenting the guidelines and guardrails around it. Be it how do we look at authentication authorization, not only APIs, but initially to start with APIs, but also then the app level and others. And also the other very important thing which we ran was, not only the trainings and some sessions, but we also did some, hands-on classroom sessions to showcase how, you could look at the code, understand where the security issues could be, and then how do we address it on the fly, right? So that was again part of the whole guild operations we did, where we run this, and we also brought in cybersecurity experts to help us also, address that gap, provide the knowledge to the team. And finally, tooling is another big challenge. The reason being there is, like we know, there are many tools out there, but what is that which fits the platform, fits the organizational constructs also, right? As part of enterprise architecture and the overall merged technology, we also had choices to be made, and because when we started, those guidelines were not in place, or those things were still in motion. We were what we call the version 1 of the cybersecurity program at that point. So tooling was something which was still being debated and discussed. But in the meantime, we were also building this platform and getting ready for customer releases. So that is where we started looking at some of the ways to handle this. And that's why when you heard Priyanka talk about how do we implement, so we had to choose between commercial and open sources to satisfy the needs at that time. The other big challenge obviously is because we wanted everything to be pipeline driven and automated as much as possible. The build time started getting impacted because if you may know, some of these tools do take a lot of time to run through, right? So that also became an issue because the team started complaining about the time it takes. It also, when obviously we also saw failures in the builds, right? Because the tools will not work. And some of the tools, obviously, we know started in the enterprise world is not so cloud native, so it also makes it difficult. And we wanted all this alerting and logging mechanism, but what is the right way to do it? So we introduced, like we said, start with the open source where we didn't find any alternatives with the existing approved tools which we had at Musk. With Azure, we had a good offering of Sentinel to start with, but then by that time we had also decided to go with Datadog as our monitoring tool for applications and logging. So we combined those two to help us with alerting and provide monitors so that there can be proactive, intervention if required. And also, what we also did is to reduce the time for the pipelines and other things. We started scheduling tests separately and having different ways of looking at it. We also looked at reducing the size of the repositories. Again, the journey. If you look at while we are in the microservices world. In truth, not everything was microservice. There were still a lot of monoliths, monorepos, and stuff like that. So we started breaking that, making it more manageable and independent, so that we can run those tests. Okay, so those were some of the very key areas of it. Obviously, there were other challenges as we went through this whole journey. Changing the mindset, getting things in the backlog was not easy. I think that's something which every organization struggles with. And we are also not done yet, right? So when we look back, it surely has been a challenging but also a very rewarding journey, because what we have done is we have completely changed the spectrum on the security side of what this platform needs. We also are positive because of the assessments we do today within Maersk. We are one of the top platforms to look at security very seriously, right? So our maturity curve in addressing this area has been phenomenal. But there are a few other areas where we believe we need to still accelerate, and one of them is automation. And we have been very clear on that automation is the way forward, because as we grow and this organization is still growing and the platform will grow with more customers there, how do we make sure that it still works? And that's through automation. And we want to improve our quality gates. Right today, the quality gates are not automated completely, because there is manual check. The reports come out, but then somebody has to make sure it's happening and it's addressed before it goes to production. The second big area of improvement is obviously on the reporting. While today, when you saw those examples, those reports come in the pipelines, but then a large platform with hundreds of microservices and other applications there, it becomes a daunting task to look at every one of them, right? And it's not going to scale for us. So that is the next one we are addressing, to create one unified view for the platform, and which can then showcase what is the security posture of the platform. Now, you may also have seen that there are something we call the security beacons. So beacons is more about on the live system in production, what is the state of it, right? But how do we know the security posture before even we get into production? And that's what this reporting will help us address. And finally, like any case with any issues, how do we improve that time, right? Time to recover, so that if there is any attack or any detection, how do we react and recover faster? And luckily for us, so far we have been able to not only recover fast, but also know the issues before any major damage happens to the platform, to the data security, or to the applications that we run on. So these are the three areas, and obviously, as we go through this journey in this year, we will again, look at more tooling and more automation to help us scale the pipelines that we have set up. With that, thank you for your audience, and I think we'll open up for questions. What does that go? Okay, there are a couple of questions on the chat. Is there anybody who wants to unmute and ask a question? Please go ahead. Well, in the meantime, we'll see if there is anything on the chat. Do you see anything which
yeah, I see a couple of questions. Like I think I answered two of them, but there's one more here on what is threat modeling? What threat modeling framework and tools do you use? So yeah, so for that we started off with Stride, and now and the tools per se, we started off with the Microsoft Threat Modeler, but now we've actually moved on to using a data flow diagram from like what the architects actually already produce. Any sort of tool that produce your DFDs, we are okay with that. It could even be pen and paper, but we usually document this in our Confluence pages, and then the threats we basically use. We've been using the OWASP security. Uh, OWASP security. Somebody said something. Hello. Okay.
Okay. I think there's a couple of questions tooling. I think we have tried to cover the tooling we do, but I think again, there's no silver bullet to that, right? Different tools work differently. What we have been very focused is, what works for us in the cloud environment is more cloud native, and that's what we have been addressing. We also have a larger, like I said, the cybersecurity team, which also looks at, and recommends tools. And that is an ongoing exercise. So we started with, like Priyanka said, the year back we didn't have enough tools, so we chose some of the open sources we know, for example, the antivirus scans and others, and then Zap and others. But then we also have moved to commercial ones like Black Duck and Polaris and others, and we are in that process of also integrating those. Yeah, honestly, all of those tools are good. I think the important thing we have realized is, how do we optimize it, the profiles, so that it works well for us. There was another question, which is, maybe I'll just take this one, and then Priyanka, you can look for other things. There is something called business as usual versus traditional thing. I think Sandy George has talked about. If I understood, as you are asking the question, is the architecture and theme different for on-prem and other things? So within our platform, we do not have separate teams as such. So we have actually moved away from having it, let's say, an on-prem team versus a cloud team. It's one team which takes care of both. Most of our, in this, what we talked about is everything which is cloud first native new platform, which we started a couple of years back, right? So it was from ground up, was thought to be cloud first, microservices first, all that thing. So that way we were, I would say, lucky that we didn't have to deal with some of those concerns. But we also have an estate in the on-prem scenario, or the data centers we own, and that has its own security realms, and it's completely because it's a data center, it has its own tight security concerns, right? And that runs within that, and the integration between on-prem and this also is managed through a very secure pipeline. So there is no way we can get in or out. So nothing goes into the data center. Everything, things which come out, also has a secure, what we call the ground to cloud interfacing. The team for us, the business as usual is in maintenance mode, because that is where our, let's say, the core of the business today runs. So it's more of a maintenance there. We don't invest any more in that, and all our investments is now into the new digital platform. Hope that answers it. Okay, Priyanka, anything else? So.
Yeah, I saw one question on like whether we're using IAST tooling. No, actually we aren't using that, or RASP. We're not using that, but this is something again we are being evaluating that for to kind of replace some of our tooling, but that's currently we're not doing that.
There was one bit about where do you record your bugs. I think, yeah, no, we don't use Jira. Instead of Jira, AzureDevops provides a Jira-like environment. So we use that extensively. Jira is also another tool we use in our organization, but this platform organization was already in AzureDevops, where you can manage your backlog. If you're not familiar with AzureDevops is an integrated environment where you can get your backlog management, your Git repositories, test management. So it's one tooling which can support many different things, and the pipelines, right? So which probably is more popular is the pipeline that comes out of the box there.
Yeah, like I think Joji said, I'm just looking at the chat. I think there are a lot of questions on the tooling. Yeah, so asking whether Sonar Cube, but so we actually started our journey with Sonar Cube, and now, like Joji said, we've moved on to like more licensed versions. I think, yeah, if you don't have anything, it's good to always do security testing. So I would say go with Sonar Cube, but if you have access to a licensed tool, I think because it's licensed, they do put more effort in it. So the results you will see is a little bit more different versus open source and the license. But for the DAST, I think we have not found any alternatives to open source. So I think our recommendation is OWASP Zap. I think it's a good tool. Yeah.
So just to add to that, right? See the principle on which we said, for tooling or anything is, something is better than nothing, right? Just as simple as that. So any tool you use will be always better than not having that test done. So my recommendation would be use one of them. Doesn't matter which one it is, because that will help you really, shift the whole, process to the left early enough. And think this, right? What is that we are trying to do in this new digital world is being more agile, right? So if you want agility in the whole process and continuous delivery, we are talking about digital native organizations being able to deliver or deploy every day, every second, every minute, right? If we want to get there, how do we get there? So because security is one big factor which will stop that, right? Because if you have to have a downtime because of security, that is business loss, that is availability loss for your organization. So the earlier we do that, we just get better off. And that is what we have also seen. If you have seen the graph from last year to this year, the issues we have found through a penetration test, it has really reduced, to single digits. But that is because of the investment we have done. So there is an investment. There is no way out of it. But then that will reap the rewards as you progress in this journey. So somebody else on budgeting resources. Okay, so the other question on budgeting resources is an organizational thing. Yes, we have, because we put security as central to the whole operating model. So the budget runs from there. So again, the difference here, what we also have tried is from the traditional where you need a budget for a security team to manage it. We didn't go that way. We agreed that we will invest in the teams to build up that security knowledge and the engineering we need. So that way it's one budget and there's no separate need for it. So the other thing obviously which is harder and tougher is obviously to get this into the backlog, right? So if you make it one backlog, so the other thing which we have been very focused and conscious about is that there is no two backlog. There's no one backlog for business and one for technology, right? It's one backlog which has business features and technology features or technology needs, and that's how we are trying to address it. We are not there completely there in that sense, but at least we have moved the needle to a large extent that we have a seat in that also. And then because we made also architecture central to this, there's no compromise on, let's say, anything which is security, for example. Good. I don't know. How do you? Okay, there's something on motivating people. Maybe Priyanka, you want to take up that?
Yeah, I think so I think one of the big learnings that we have, which Joji talked about, was having this DevSecOps guild or a developers guild. So that way, because we share these stories on how we solve issues, I think that's been very motivating for our developers. And I think also being sometimes being a security person, you also don't want to be always too preachy. I would say find a developer friend, architect friend. So I have a great friend in Joji, as well as a group of our architects. So everybody understands the problem. So if you embrace a guild or a forum and describe that, then I think that's good. And also, it's also a two-way street, right? Because sometimes we also don't understand the problems with the features and the other implications like performance and usability over security. So that way, being a part of a forum, you're not only talking security but also with the other considerations. I think that really helps. So I think that would be a big thing to do. Have a forum that meets regularly.
Yeah, thanks, Joji and Priyanka. It was a great insights. Our next session will start at 2:30. So please visit the India Cloud Security Summit website and pick up any one of the tracks. We have 3 tracks running. And don't forget to fill the survey which I shared earlier. We will catch up in another session. Thank you everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.